Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. Hope you guys are all doing well. We've got a fantastic show on the way. But first, I just want to say thanks to NORD VPN, our sponsors here at the Everything is Black and White podcast, who without none of this would be possible. And we've teamed up with them to offer our listeners and viewers an exclusive offer. You can click the link in the podcast description box or go to nordvpn.com/tune to sign up and save your pennies on a plan. It is well worth your time to sign up. You are secure, you are safe, and you're supporting the podcast. Why sign up? I hear you ask. Well, there are a host of benefits. For me, it is the value for money because one subscription can be used across 10 devices. That's your work phone, your personal phone, your tablet, what have you. 10 devices, one subscription. I mean, that is the definition of value for money. The other thing I love about it as well is the way that it keeps your details safe and secure when browsing on public Wi-Fi. So if you're on the bus, the train, you're in a cafe and you're connected to their Wi-Fi, there is always the risk that your details could be compromised. That's your bank details, your passwords, and a load of other stuff as well. But with Nord, you are safe and you are secure. And that for me means a heck of a lot. And look, if you're going abroad as well and you're missing your home comforts and you want to keep with it with all your UK streaming services, then you can click the location back to the UK and make sure you never miss your favorite program. What is not to love about it? It's absolutely fantastic. Very simple to get on board. You download the app, you sign up, and away you go. You're keeping yourself safe, you're keeping yourself secure, and you're supporting the podcast at the same time. And another benefit, and I've already mentioned three, and there are a host of other things to mention as well if we had the time. But the final thing I'm going to mention is a 30-day money back guarantee. So it's literally no risk. If you don't like it, get your money back. But you will like it because it's a superb app to have on your phone. Keeps you safe, keeps you secure. And once again, you're supporting the podcast. So click the link or go to nordvpn.com/tune to take advantage of an exclusive offer for our listeners and viewers of the Everything is Black and White podcast. Roll the titles. Hello and welcome back to the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm Andrew Musgrove, joined by our chief sports writer, Lee Ryder, for what we hope will become a regular Q&A. You guys have sent in your questions and I'm going to put the very best of them to Lee about all things Newcastle United. Lee, welcome back to the podcast. We are recording this ahead of Newcastle's game against Wolves on Saturday. Are you looking forward to the return of Premier League football?
Yeah, I think you always do after the international breaks. I think obviously watching England's, a good passion of mine as well, watching the World Cup qualifiers. But I think when that Premier League music is back at St James's Park, after that sort of little break, you do appreciate that a little bit more. And I can't wait.
Yeah, we've got a match preview and a view from the opposition coming up later in the week. Before we begin with the first question to Lee, just going to point you guys in the direction of our Champions League print special, which goes on sale on the 10th of September. You can get it online and in all good stocklists as well. The link will be in the podcast description box, and it does, as I've said there, it is a preview to the Champions League, the Europe's Elite Cup competition, of course, kicking off next week against Barcelona. So this is just what you need to whet the appetite. Lee, we will dive into the questions. We had quite a few sent in, so I'm looking forward to getting your insight into what's been asked by our viewers and listeners. First up, we've got one sent in by Dave, who says, "Hi Lee, despite collecting just 2 points from the opening 3 games, how pleased do you think Eddie Howe would be with certain aspects of the performances, and how optimistic will he be that he can build on those positives?"
Well, I'm sure he won't be happy that Newcastle haven't won yet, but I think, as you say, there's a lot of positives there to be drawn. I mean, 2 clean sheets for me, away to Aston Villa and away to Leeds, 2 tough places to go. Newcastle's defence not breached in them 2 games. So they are big positives. But probably the big thing that I would take away from all that is that, all 3 games so far have had the Isak saga swirling around it, and the players have been able to focus on the pitch. Very unlucky not to get anything out of the Liverpool game. That was an unbelievably battling performance, and everything was there in terms of the performance. Unfortunately, couldn't get the actual result and were very harshly beaten at the end. But no, I can't see any major concerns yet. We do need a win. There's no doubt about that. But I think Eddie will be happy with some things. But he's always striving to win. So I don't think he would actually say in a press conference completely satisfied.
But I guess the fact that I think 34 chances were created over those 3 games, it gives a foundation. Now they've got 2 forwards in the building to build upon. And I think for many, I don't know if you agree, Lee, but for many, if they'd had a centre forward up top for those 3 games, the points tally would be looking a lot better than it currently does.
Yeah, absolutely. So many chances in those games where it was just begging for somebody to time the run or get to the front or back post and poke it in. It's been just that final, finishing touch. That's all that's been missing. And I think going into this game now, Newcastle have got some players now who, offensively have got goals about them. So, yeah, let's just hope that, it takes time to obviously gel. But let's just hope that the weekend can be that sort of turning point in terms of a win and a few more goals.
Certainly so. The next question comes in from Helen. She says, hope you both all right. With players now getting England caps alongside several other players playing for their countries, how important do you think this is when it comes to persuading others to join Newcastle United?
Yeah, I think it is. It is important. I think people will look at Anthony Gordon going from sort of Everton and, not being the complete player. But now find himself right in the England reckoning, potentially going to the World Cup. Dan Burn, the fairy tale continues for him. 3 caps now to his name, so he's well clear of that 1 cap wonder club that some players fear getting in. And then Livramento, and for me, I just love watching him play. Whatever side of the pitch he's on, just gliding forward, and it's just such a joy to see it for both club and country. And I just think that he's just going to get better and better and better.
Yeah, and hopefully be tied down to a new contract as well, which is one of the questions we've got later to put to you. I mean, when you look at the likes of Bruno and Joe Linton, probably would be in the Brazilian squad as well, had he not picked up that injury. Tonali scoring the winner for Italy the other night. If you are a potential new player coming to Newcastle United, one of the questions you will be asking is about, am I going to a club that is under that gets enough attention that actually I will get international recognition? But you look at the players getting the caps, and the answer is seemingly yes.
Yeah, it is, and a potential signing will look at that and think, wow, I could be in a team just blessed with so many international players, and it continues with the window Newcastle have had. So yeah, for me, I think that is Newcastle are going places, regardless of what's happened with Isak. The club in general are going places. There's exciting things happening at the club. Champions League, potential announcements on new stadiums and training grounds. So it's a place to be at the minute. And if people don't want to be part of it, then be it. But for me, this is probably one of the most exciting teams we've watched in years at St James's Park. So yeah, it's an exciting time.
It certainly is, and it goes hand in hand with the success of Newcastle United. If they're successful on the pitch with the players they've got, then that's going to inevitably lead to call-ups, as it has done for the majority of Newcastle's stars. Another question that's come in from Tony, and he asks, what does the future hold for Lewis Miley? For obvious reasons, Eddie wants to keep him in the squad, but is there a risk to Miley's development if he can't get first-team football?
Yeah, I mean, great question. Really good question, that. You look at Elliot Anderson, who's now absolutely flying with England. Again, last night, fantastic against Serbia. And you ask the question, would he have got the opportunities that he's had at Nottingham Forest if he'd stayed at Newcastle? The answer is probably no. Now, I don't know how they would have got around that. You don't ideally want to sell him, but by the same token, he needs to develop. And Lewis Miley's now at exact same position where, for me, if you ask the majority of fans, would he be in your starting 11? You'd probably say no, which then lends itself to, well, how do you get him the game time? How does he get that regular football? And probably, if we're being honest about it, he probably could do with going out on loan and having a season where he has 36, 37 games, wherever that would be. Would it be in an overseas division? Could he go to Spain or Italy or somewhere like that and get that wealth of experience? So, yeah, I mean, not writing him off at all, because I think he's a fantastic player and a great lad. But I think he's going to get continually frustrated sitting on the bench. And whether he comes in for Carabao Cup or gets cameos in Europe, or maybe plays against some of the less daunting fixtures in that Champions League group. Not that there's many. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, it's a really good question, and I'd love to see other people's opinions on it. But that's mine. That I think he needs to go probably on loan.
Yeah, let us know in the comments your thoughts on the future of Lewis Miley. I guess it's really difficult for Eddie Howe, isn't it? Because he can probably understand that question about Miley's personal development, but at the same time, he's got to think about football club as a whole and what's best for his squad. And having a player like Miley in that squad is the best thing for Newcastle United. But at the same time, not giving him first team football at this age, it could stunt his development. So it's a difficult balance to get, and one that we definitely want to know your opinion on, guys. So do let us know in the comments. Sticking with the prospect of loan deals, we've got another question here. No name on this one, but they say, we saw a few go through late in the window. Can you share any insight, Lee, on how much research goes into the teams and the setup in which we are sending our young players to?
What, in terms of the ones going on loan or the ones coming in?
Yeah, the ones going on loan, I think this question's referring to. So, like, going to whatever club in Holland or France, because it must be difficult for the club. I mean, some of these loan deals did come kind of out of the blue. So you probably don't have enough time to really go and research facilities or the manager or what have you. And I think a lot of people just be quite interested to know how you think it works in terms of, that club is right for this youngster to develop.
Well, if I'm being, you want honest answers from as well. If I'm being honest, then, you look at QL, the Australian lad, the Australian international, who didn't have two good loan spells, went to Hearts, didn't play, went to Volendam in Holland, which was a disaster by what I was told, not fitting into the system, manager getting sacked, and then, coming back and not getting it. So it's probably, if we're being honest, it's probably an area that, needs to be, looked at. So for me, it's an area of the club where there's room for improvement. These things aren't easy because you've got to find the right club, the right manager, and everybody everybody has to be reading off the same sort of hymn sheet. And that for me is an area that Newcastle, if they're being honest, would say they're going to improve in. A new sporting director on the horizon coming in, that might be one of the areas that he does look at.
I guess in an ideal world, what you want is a setup where you may be sending whoever it is, especially if it's youngsters, to the same team. So, you know exactly where they're going to, exactly what staff they're working with, exactly what environment they're being placed into, rather than, in many ways, I guess, and this is just my opinion, maybe sending them out on a bit of a gamble, because how can Shola Amiobi or whoever it is properly research where these guys are going to? Will be down to a little bit of luck, I guess, that they get the first team football, that they settle and they can develop. Travis Hearns moved on loan to FC Groningen in Holland with an option for the side to make it permanent. And Ian asks here that he thought and has read things which suggest Hearns, could be quite the player. Why would Newcastle put in such an option to potentially sell him?
Yeah, I mean, that one raised eyebrows for me as well. I mean, one other little thing to add on to the last bit is that, you look at Man City and other sort of big clubs where they've got affiliate clubs and they know exactly where they're sending the players to. They know who they're going to be working with. The setup is funded partly by the parent club, if you like. So that is one way of potentially improving it. As far as Travis Hearn's concerned, I watched him come through the sort of youth ranks at Newcastle, and I thought, he's going to be a decent player. And he's 6'2", strong in the tackle. He's an excellent sort of battler in midfield. Desperately needs first team football, which he's going to get. But if he has an absolutely brilliant season, going to be able to sign him at the end of it. So that would suggest to me that that's an interesting move from Newcastle, and maybe they don't think he's going to potentially make it at Newcastle. Whether there's any kind of buyback clause, we don't know. But yeah, that one was an interesting one, and perhaps Newcastle feel that there's other players coming through beneath him that could go on and really kick on in the future.
You'd have to hope for deals like this and future deals that Newcastle do follow what Man City do a lot of the time by selling these youngsters, but making sure that there is a buyback clause in these deals. We saw that with James Trafford, for example. Obviously, there isn't one for Elliot Anderson, and your article probably broke a few hearts on Tyneside by revealing that, but maybe going forward, that is something that the club will look to do. Moving on from the youngsters to a man that won't be welcome back on Tyneside anytime soon, Mr. Alexander Isak. We've had plenty of questions in about him, and I've kind of just put them all together. The main one was about lessons to be learned from that saga. And Lee, what do you think the main kind of 1, 2, 3 lessons are to be taken from the saga?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, from Isak's point of view, the lesson that he'll probably learn from it is that if you want certain clauses and things, you've got to get them written, tied into that contract, and you need it in stone, set in stone. That seems to have been the problem here. It seems to have been a verbal agreement at some point that, he could get the move or a contract. But the lesson for me is that they let it drag on about his contract. That could have been towards the end of last season. Newcastle could have probably got him tied down on a contract, absolutely nailed down. You have that conversation with him about a new contract and potentially breaking the wage ceiling, which I know they're very delicate about. But for me, if you speak to him days after he's just scored the goal that proved to be the winner against Liverpool and at Wembley, and say, look, we're going places and we want you to be the man to take us even further, then I think potentially at that time he could sign that contract, and then this doesn't happen. So yeah, I think that's the lesson to be learned, not to let things drag on and let things linger. If everybody is sure that Alexander Isak is the man to lead Newcastle forward in the future, then get him signed down on the contract. And that didn't happen, and it just became inevitable that he was going to go.
And we've had plenty of questions on contracts as well. And I mentioned Tino Livramento just before, and a lot of the questions have been about him, Sandro Tonali, Lewis Hall, another one about getting these stars on bigger contracts, extending them, so Newcastle United feel a little bit more protected when it comes to maybe other clubs knocking on the door with interest. How likely do you think it is that we will see 1, 2, 3 of those players that I've mentioned there, maybe some other stars, being offered new deals in the next year or so?
And I hope it's soon for Livramento, because the last window Newcastle fended off serious interest from Manchester City, and I think they'll be back again sooner rather than later if Newcastle don't get that one sort of tied down. For me, I've already said my admiration for what a player he is to watch, how comfortable he is on the ball, getting the ball in the box. He's one of the players that Eddie Howe had a vision over, and he's proved to be exactly right with that vision. But now I think he's got to a point where he's had a great start at Newcastle, and he now needs to have that reward for the progress. But I think realistically for me, how long do you tie him down for? I think it's probably an enhanced deal with a couple of years on top. So yeah, one that I would like to see Newcastle get signed, sealed, and delivered as soon as possible. And maybe someone like Lewis Hall could follow. There's other players that serve contracts, but Livramento will be top of my list to get signed up.
Do you think potentially going forward, what we might see is the club agreeing to or even pushing for release clauses in the contracts to avoid what happened in the summer? Now that might sound daft to certain people, but I'm talking about like this summer, Man City's interest. And I came on the podcast and I said, £100 million is where the conversation starts. And people went, what are you on about? But for me, he's that good. That's the minimum price. What we saw in the summer was, Newcastle valued him at Isak at £150 million. Liverpool didn't want to play that initially, didn't pay it in the end, and it dragged on and it was a big saga. Whereas if Newcastle put in a price that they're comfortable with in this contract, then what we see is they don't get involved in this kind of soap opera, but at the same time they get a fee that they are comfortable with, and it just kind of removes that whole drama that nobody actually wants.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like with Bruno Guimaraes, he had a release clause in his contract, but nobody activated it. I think that was last summer when Man City were kind of sort of like they were thinking about it, but they didn't go ahead with it. We obviously didn't think that it was worth what the clause was. So it's a tough one, but I think it's about keeping the players. Sometimes you might not be able to sign a player unless that demand goes in. So it's a tough one. It's a case-by-case scenario. But for me, I mean, look, if Newcastle to get, say, Pedro from Brighton, and if Real Madrid come in, I've got to make that move, then I guess you have to go with it. So it just depends on the case-by-case situation. I don't think you can avoid certain clauses on players because agents are just so clever now. It's the most complex it's ever been with agents in football, and I think clubs have just got to be completely wary of that fact.
Well, not every agent, but we'll leave that one there. Dave Hopkinson has arrived, new CEO. This question here from Peter NUFC says, do you think him starting after the transfer window closed was a decision taken by Newcastle United, or was it just a coincidence?
I think he might have had some ties with basketball in Canada. I'm not 100% sure if that might have been a leaving period. I don't know. But I think it came at a good time because you wouldn't want to throw him in the middle of all the chaos in a window. Not that he'll have too much clout when it comes to transfers. It's other things, but had he been able to come in directly after the last season finished, then that would have been a good scenario for Newcastle. Obviously, that wasn't possible, so he's come in now, but welcome aboard. I think it's a great appointment. I thought absolutely enjoyed his interviews that he'd done on NUFC TV. I thought they just put a bit of fresh air back into the club, and I just loved watching his enthusiasm. And it just feels that whatever happens now, it won't be through the want of trying. I think he's going to go around and he's going to listen to lots of different opinions. He was totally honest. He said he wasn't an expert. We've had people come in as if they know everything. He never said anything like that. It's a learning curve. He's been at some massive organisations, which I think me and you have both mentioned in certain pieces. So, it doesn't come much bigger than Real Madrid. He comes here, welcome on board, and we look forward to seeing what else he's got to say.
Yeah, certainly so. I think his experience is what really excites me, and hopefully he can transfer that experience into running a Premier League club. We're still waiting on the appointment of Director of Football. You mentioned it just briefly. Why is this taking so long? And have we got any suggestion that the reported target, which is said to be Ross Wilson and Nottingham Forest, is indeed the man that they are looking to bring in?
Well, I mean, he's definitely someone that's been on the list, but as far as even at the weekend was concerned, he's still very much in the thick of it at Nottingham Forest. A lot of stuff going on there. I think they just haven't managed to negotiate any kind of package for him. So it's disappointing that we've gone this long now. It's been since May now, 4 months. So let's hope they can get that one in the bag. But if they can't, then I think you've got to kind of like sort of tip your hat to Eddie Howe and his backroom staff. They managed to have a good window regardless of the Isak situation. In terms of incoming recruitment, I think it was good. And they managed to do it without a sport director, which is even more remarkable. But if they are going to compete with the big boys going forward, then that's a position that needs to be filled and filled quickly.
Another one here that's come from Ben says the opinion from Germany, or some in Germany, is that Newcastle may have overpaid for Nick Voldemare. What's your view?
Yeah, I've seen some of the very candid remarks from Mario Basler and Hoeneß as well at Bayern Munich, and unbelievable that the level of almost feels like bitterness, doesn't it? What's been said for Bayern to miss out on a player and then go on the way they've gone on. I find that remarkable. But a player's worth what you want to pay for him. If you think he's worth £69 million and you've stopped a Champions League rival from getting that player, then that may be deemed a good deal. But for me, he's coming in here now, and it's just about him settling in, really. It shouldn't be, if he doesn't score 3 goals on his debut against Wolves, even if he doesn't score, it doesn't matter. As long as the team wins and he's played a part in that, and then he builds on it for the future. I mean, it's not every player gets off to a flying start. It's fantastic when a player can get a goal or 2 on his debut or get man of the match or whatever, but it's not always possible. So I think you have to try and take the heat off a little bit on that one. But for me, any player that comes in for a big transfer fee sometimes feels that pressure. We've seen it with Joe Linton when he first came in a few years ago. So I just hope he settles down quickly. Looks already, from the interviews that I've seen, it looks, very composed. But it'll take time. It'll take time for him to, from getting out of a hotel to your own property. That's a big one. So it might take an extra few weeks. But yeah, if he scores at the weekend, even better. But if he doesn't, let's give him all the time that he needs to become a star at Newcastle United.
Yeah, patience being the key word. And I guess when you've got Johan Visser there, experienced in the Premier League, it will allow Nick Voldemare a little time to settle. And we've got a question here from Frank, who says, I'm much more optimistic about our prospects going forward now that Isak is gone. Isak was injury prone and had days when he was far from on top form. With the 2 strikers we've bought and a Sulat developing, I hope we'll have a more consistent attacking lineup this season. Thoughts on that, Lee?
Yeah, well, I think Isak did have his days where he wasn't fit or he felt a little pull and he didn't play. I spoke to one ex-player in January about Isak, and he said some games he felt like he was worried about getting further injuries and stuff like that. But look, at the end of the day, he's at Liverpool now. He goes on there, and the first thing he's got to do is catch up with match fitness, having been on strike. So yeah, interesting question, but I think the new lads coming in will eventually, when things calm down, they'll have their own sort of freshness. And I think Newcastle, hopefully about October, November time, will hit that kind of sweet point where people have got the right amount of minutes in their legs and they've settled down and they're gelling with the team. And by that sort of time, just before Christmas, you just hope Newcastle, the team is settled and the changes are settled, and we're hopefully no longer talking about Alexander Isak.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. We never have to mention them again after Nick Voldemare and Johan Visser both score Mickey Quinn style of goals, a number of goals like he did on his debut on Saturday against Wolves. That would be lovely. I think it was 4 goals, wasn't it, in 1988, 1989? So somewhere to start. We can hope, Lee. Another question that's coming here from Doug says, you wrote earlier this week that Newcastle are potentially still interested in Marc Guehi. And do you really think that Newcastle could persuade him to move to Tyneside in January?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one that Newcastle, certainly from Eddie Howe's point of view, he likes the player. That's always a big start. I mean, he's still at Crystal Palace, so it means that we're definitely in with an opportunity to still potentially get him. But look, Liverpool were desperate to get him, and Palace, put the block on it on the final day. I can't think of how devastating that must be for Marc Guehi to not get that move after everything that went on with Newcastle in the first place, when Newcastle, put in a 70 million bid and still didn't get him. For me, I think he'd still be a good player to sign if Liverpool don't end up going for him again in January, which is what I wrote the other day. Then that might just leave the door open for Newcastle. Could they go in with a cut price offer? You can't have enough good players. So if they signed Marc Guehi in January, then I think that would be an outstanding piece of business. And given everything that's gone on with Isak at Liverpool, then maybe it might be a little bit of I don't think transfer revenge is the word, but if Newcastle signed him, then I think that would be a sweet piece of business.
Yeah, bit of payback. I mean, it would be a tremendous signing. It'll probably come down to whether Crystal Palace want a cash fee from him or prepared to let him go on a free, because he won't be a Crystal Palace player this time next year. So it's about what they want on their balance sheet, I guess. Penultimate question then, and if you can shed any light on this, Lee, I'll be very pleased, because it's hurting my brain slightly, and we've had quite a few questions in about the Man City / Premier League ruling over the APT rules. So that is, for those who don't know, I'm going to try and sum it up as best I can. Obviously, they were kind of going through a legal battle about APT rules, and then they have agreed that the battle will end. Man City will drop their case. It now looks like Man City will be able to push through quite a big deal from Etihad, which was initially rejected due to these APT ruling. And the question from our point of view, Lee, everyone is asking, what does it mean for Newcastle United? But it doesn't seem all that clear at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I've read with interest a few sort of observations from that, and Newcastle have got some unbelievable links in Saudi, some very rich companies that they could partner up with moving forward. Man City have just basically unlocked the door to get this huge deal through with some airlines, so it could give them unbelievable clout in the window moving forward, PSR, all that sort of stuff. I mean, there'll be people who have got a much more in-depth legal view on how it could work moving forward, but all you can say is that you hope that, given Newcastle's links in Saudi Arabia, some of the partners that they've got, then this could hopefully open the door at some stage for a big deal to be pushed through. And that's probably, without going into it too much, that's probably you try and stay focused on what the headline could be. And if it means Newcastle land a sponsor for the stadium or whatever, or the training ground, which they haven't managed to do so far, it'll just put them in on a much more even keel with a Manchester City, who have been able to pretty much spend at will in recent years, and Newcastle are still playing catch up with teams like City at the moment.
Yeah, there was a report from Dan Rowan on the BBC which said that Premier League clubs are after some clarity, and I think we all are, because it's not exactly clear what Man City are getting out of this. It's not exactly clear what it means for every club, but certainly Newcastle will be watching to see what it means, because, as you said, the links are there. There's some potential big deals to be made, but it all comes back to what is fair market value. But certainly with Dave Hopkinson and Peter Silverstone at the helm, the potential is there, and we'll just have to wait and see what this ruling does mean. Final question then, Lee. The stadium is on the tongue of every Newcastle United fan. They want to know exactly what is going on. It's another one that's kind of been delayed. We were told early 2025 and nothing as of yet. Another piece you wrote earlier this week, or today even, about Newcastle's chairman being shown a kind of a concept of what the Gallagher end could look like. We've had questions sent in as well about when are we going to hear an update. I mean, first off, can you shed any light on what the Gallagher could look like? And secondly, when do you think we will hear some update on the stadium?
Yeah, well, I think the conversation's kind of been reopened by David Hopkinson coming in. I mean, obviously, again, off what I said before, he's not coming in saying he's an expert on everything, but he's kind of like lifted the lid a little bit more on the conversation. He's mentioned that, you know, the location is absolutely vital, which suggests that St James's Park remaining is still definitely an option. And there's been plans drawn up for that, which were shown to Newcastle sort of top brass towards the end of last season when they met up at Mafton Hall, I think it was. And, you know, the stadium was a big talking point, and these graphics that aren't in the public domain have been discussed and shown. And as the article sort of alludes to that I done earlier, basically the only part of the ground that can really be increased is the Gallagher end. You can't do anything with the East Stand for obvious reasons with the listed buildings and all that next to it. Level 7 is miles away from the action. Well, it would be miles away from the action if you tried to extend that even further. So there's the distance there, can't do anything with that. So the only place to really improve is the Gallagher end. And I think there is potential that, you know, we could see a stand that sort of stretches outwards onto Strawberry Place. And I think that's the images that may have been discussed. And certainly the images have been shown, but that's the option that seems to be up for discussion if Newcastle stay at St James's Park. Obviously, the other option is moving somewhere else, but there seems to be less control over that possibility because planning permission, working with the council, all that sort of stuff. St James's Park is still a viable option, but we await further updates.
And when do you think we'll get that? Anytime soon? Or you just, because that's what we're doing. We're just waiting, aren't we?
Well, it was meant to be early 2025 and it's now September. So it's hard, if not impossible, to put a time limit on it. I did go to a big fan event last November where I thought things were moving swiftly then because they were actually sitting talking about the options on stage. But unfortunately, you know, 9-10 months on, we haven't really had any concrete movement on that one. So I think the next sort of fan meetings that they have, I'm pretty sure they'll be ready with the questions. I would love to, as I'm sure you would love to be in attendance at one of those meetings. Which
certainly so.
Did used to happen a long time ago.
Well, we will wait for the latest update, and when we get it, you guys will also get it over on chroniclelive.co.uk. Thank you to Lee for popping on and answering your questions. Do it thumbs up, do it subscribe, do get into the comments on YouTube, do leave us a rating and review on the audio-only platform, and take advantage of your NORD VPN offer, exclusive offer to our listeners and viewers of the Everything is Black and White podcast. Keep safe and secure while online and support the podcast at the same time. And for myself and Lee, we will see you guys very soon.